I'm building a bonsai stand that has a base with mitered corners. Now, mitered corners are intrinsically weak. They just use end grain that are joined at a 45-degree angle, and the end grain just soaks up glue, and it's a very weak joint, so you have to reinforce them somehow. So I'm planning on using splines. I built this spline jig for a previous bonsai stand. If you haven't seen that video, I'll leave it linked up here. I don't really like this spline jig for a couple of reasons. It's not very versatile. It can only put the spline in one position, about 1 inch from the edge of the corner. I also over-engineer the heck out of it, and in spite of that, this still isn't a perfect 90-degree angle. But worst of all, it doesn't have a whole lot of surface area here to clamp the workpiece. To make a spline like this, I put it in here, and then I have to clamp it this way. The problem is this frame has this arch cut out of it, so I can't put a spline on this side because it just can't be clamped. So I'm going to build a new spline jig, but I'm going to use the parts out of this because I like reusing pieces and, well, because I'm cheap. I don't have a plan for this yet, but the idea in my head, at least, the jig will be more accurate and simpler and more versatile. So let's take this apart. In the spirit of reusing stuff, I'd like to just reuse the parts here and not use any new material to make this jig, but I'm not sure if that's going to be possible, but let's see what we can do. First, I'm just going to find the approximate center of this piece. It's about 17¼ inches long, so I'll put it at around 8½, give or take. Doesn't have to be perfect. And now we'll use this framing square to mark 45-degree angles that intersect right at the midpoint. My idea is to just have this as the fence and to use these existing pieces attached here and here to act as the support pieces for my workpiece. And that'll leave space along here for the cut to happen. Hopefully that'll make sense, but let me get this assembled and we'll see if that works. I have my framing square clamped along that marked line, so now I'm just going to pre-drill some holes. And now I will countersink them from the backside. I now have one of these little scraps clamped along my framing square, so I will pre-drill the holes into that piece and then screw them in. Okay, so far so good. Now I will just move the framing square to the other side and repeat the process. First I'll pre-drill the holes, and if you're wondering why I'm using screws and not glue, it's because I have no idea if this is actually going to work, and I want this to be reversible. Well, I noticed a problem with the design. You'll see that this one is significantly higher than this one. I meant to put this one up here, so it's all right. I'll just shift this one up a little bit. All right, put the screws back in, and this demonstrates exactly why I don't typically glue things, at least in the beginning. And that should do it. Well, here it is, my brand new and improved and extra ugly spline jig. The only question is, does it work? I don't know yet. Let's find out. Well, I just noticed another problem. I wanted to have the top portion of the supports along these lines, and I put the bottom one along this line, so now I need to move this down here. Give me a second. All right. Now it is fixed, so here is my new and improved spline jig, which is still extra ugly, but I think should work. Now, let's go check it out. Okay, here is the idea. This piece is going to run along the table saw fence, and the work piece is going to go in here. I can hold it like this and run it through just like that. I wanted to make these pieces extra wide so that I can get a really firm grip on them as the workpiece is going through. This way the cut can proceed while my fingers are absolutely safe, well away from the blade. And when I need to turn this around, I can turn it around like this, and I still have a nice firm grip with this wide support. That should work perfectly. One thing I noticed while I was testing it, there's a chance that these might tilt one way or the other if I put pressure on it one way or the other. I had these 90-degree support blocks from the previous jig, so I'm just going to attach these here, and that'll make sure that these stay 90 degrees to the fence. First, I'll just mark out where to pre-drill holes. Again, I'm not being precise here because the exact placement of these really doesn't matter. And a couple of countersinks, which really, again, aren't necessary, but why not? I do want to make sure the corner I'm using is 90 degrees. That one looks good. That one looks good. So I will just mark those with a 90-degree mark. And now I will pre-drill and countersink some holes on the support piece as well. I now have the 90-degree square clamped to both the fence and the support piece. So now I will screw it in. That looks a lot, well, okay, it doesn't look better. It still looks ugly. Actually, I think it looks even uglier, but functionally, it should be a whole lot better. Now I know that the support pieces are going to stay square to the fence. Okay, this thing still works great, but one thing I've noticed is if I don't hold it really tight up against the fence, it has a tendency to want to tip that way. And that's not ideal, but I think I can fix that. I still have this piece, which used to be the base, so if I take a piece of it and attach it here like that, that'll prevent this from tipping. So let me cut a piece off of this. Since that little support piece is 3/4 of an inch thick, I'm drilling these 3 pilot holes that are countersunk 3/8 of an inch from the bottom. All right, that little support piece is now clamped in place. I'll just verify that this is still 90, and that's perfect. So now I'll screw that in. And now it's actually done. So this is staying flush to the fence, and it is not tipping at all. That should work absolutely perfectly. And once I raise the blade up and cut the first spline, I acknowledge it's going to cut this little support piece here, and that's actually fine. The blade is still going to be out of the way of this support piece, the real one, the important one, so it can chew this part up just fine. I don't really care so much about that. Well, the new jig is done. Ugly, but done. And a perfect success. I think the only thing better than a plan that works is not having a plan and it's still working. There are lots of spline jig videos on YouTube, but I think this is the simplest, and it's just made with a few pieces of scrap. All in all, this took about 20 minutes to build, and that's including the design. So if you want to build this, it should take even less time than that. Another thing that I hope you can take away from this video is you don't necessarily have to have expensive materials. You don't need to buy expensive plans. You certainly don't need to buy expensive jigs. All you really need are some scraps, maybe some imagination, and you can also build a hideously ugly jig like this for yourself. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, anything that you can do to help the channel would be appreciated. Liking, subscribing, commenting, you know all the stuff. And if you have any ideas for how I could improve this jig other than making it pretty, please do let me know down in the comments. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.